Uh, this is Don Larson again. We're ready to get started with our webinar, but before we jump into the main part of our presentation, let me just review the housekeeping rules. If you should experience problems with the webinar, please use the little questions function in the control panel there to communicate with us. These will be the duration of the webinar. Computer audio is the recommended option. There are some associated materials with this webinar that are in the little drag and drop window there in your control panel. We welcome you to grab those. Post your questions at any time during the webinar, during the panel. Don't you don't need to wait to the end, but we will, at the end, we will have a Q&A session where we'll answer all of your questions. If we shouldn't be able to answer all your questions, we'll be sure and follow up with an email. For those of you not familiar with Larson Software Technology, we're based in Houston. We were founded in 1984 as graphics technology experts. We've been doing that for over 30 years. Initially, we promoted the CGM usage by providing a free CGM viewer. We're a member of the CGM Open Foundation that maintains and looks after the CGM standard. We develop powerful 2D and 3D technical illustration conversion tools, viewing solutions, all based on the open file formats. We're the developer of the first HTML5 CGM viewer that eliminated the need for a plugin. We first introduced the CGM or a profile for CGM to assist with the standardization of that format. And Larson Software currently participates in the S1000D Graphics and Multimedia Working Group. So with all that said, now we'll turn it over to David for the main part of our presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Don, and good day, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As Don mentioned earlier, the topic we're going to cover is technical illustration, the creation of 2D and 3D illustrations. So we'll do that by providing an overview using our software, mainly through demonstration. But we have some slides as well, just to go through some of the main factors or main topics. So what we're going to demonstrate is revising 2D illustrations or working with raster and vector illustrations, existing ones, but also how you might create from scratch. We'll also look at the common file formats that you're all familiar with probably, and or if you're not, then ones we'd recommend that you look at and use. We'll also look at about adding value to illustrations by putting on callouts and hotspots for interactive manuals. And obviously the creation of 2D and 3D illustrations from 3D CAD data, which is probably most of new illustrations are created in that way. And that could be creating 2D from 3D, but also now using 3D data in the IATMs as well. The products we're going to demonstrate today, or the main illustration products we're going to demonstrate, is VizEx Edit, VizEx Edit Plus, and VizEx Edit 3D. We'll also be showing some of our viewing technology to give you kind of a downstream look at how the files might be used eventually. So there's quite a lot of different illustrations that can be created. Some of the most common ones are exploded, spare parts type illustrations, assembly, disassembly, schedule maintenance, repair, overhaul, operational and instructional. And then we have some kind of specialist illustrations like transparent illustrations, cutaway, and functional illustrations. And I would say today we could have those in both 2D and 3D and distribute those. I did mention the file formats. primarily, we will focus on CGM and SVG. We'll also talk about the raster formats, TIFF and JPEG, how you might work with them. CAD formats, IJust, STEP for importing 3D data, for reusing your CAD from your CAD system. Also PDF is still an important format for distribution, probably more than anything, but also data exchange. And then another 3D format, GLTF, for publishing 3D data, perhaps in IETMs. So from a workflow point of view, we might be beginning from 3D CAD data or 2D graphic data. So in the 3D world on the top level, we'd be importing perhaps STEP and IJust, working with those files and outputting to, in our case today, we're going to show GLTF and GLB. Those files will probably be stored in a CSDB. And the same applies to on the bottom run where we're looking at 2D illustrations, where we're creating or revising illustrations in the 2D format, primarily using CGM or SVG, or perhaps even raster, and storing them in the CSDB or the database, really. So this doesn't have to be an S1000D project. It could be any kind of database where you store your work, or just the file system itself. But at some point, if you go in electronic, then you'd put these files into an IETM, Interactive Electronic Technical Manual. And then you would need some mechanism to view these files within that browser, web browsing environment. So you need a 3D viewer or a 2D viewer, depending on the data. So the first part is really creating and revising 2D illustrations. And the main two data streams that we're working with is vector and raster. So vector being like a mathematical Bezier curve type illustration, and a raster where we're working with pixels, so an image file. So working with raster, raster files are usually legacy illustrations that have been scanned in previously, and we still come across this a lot, where illustrations exist, they're not going to be redrawn. The quality is okay. So the scenario would be to, if it's a TIFF or a JPEG, bring these into the illustration system and work with them. So we'd need to be able to edit that raster file with an image editor, add new data to it, like a vector drawing or a text or an annotation, and even hotspots in some instances, and also export then as a CGM or SVG, which would still contain the raster information intact, so we could go back and change it again, but also keep intact the vector data that we may have added. So we'd need some kind of format to do that, a hybrid format. So the three main ones, and certainly the two primary ones, are CGM or SVG. Just a note, when we save the file as a CGM or a SVG file, it does not convert the raster to vector. All it does is it contains it as it is within the file. And we get a lot of questions about, do we convert raster to vector data? And the answer is we don't. We don't have a tool to do that. There are tools out there, but it can really cause more problems than it's actually worth. So we can take that offline, but I think at the moment we'll be showing just editing the raster file. So I mentioned the hybrid file formats, and this is the benefit of and why CGM was selected many years ago for a lot of specifications, was it can contain both raster and vector data, and plus metadata, so hotspots as well. And SVG is the same. So CGM has been primarily used in the automotive and military areas because of the legacy data, but also the ability to contain hotspots and the fact that they're open formats. it was an open format. And now SVG is pretty much in the same place. So SVG is based on XML. It can contain raster and vector, and it can contain metadata hotspots. And we support both those formats. PDF a bit different. It can contain both, but it can't really contain metadata that could be recognized within an IETM. I've spoke about SVG already, scalable vector graphic. The good news on SVG is that there's been a real wish for it to be supported within the S1000D specification. And the good news is that work has been completed and approved, and it will be in the next issue 6 of S1000D. I don't have a formal release date for that, but it will be in there. So there will be an SVG profile to provide guidance, what should be in, how hotspots should be written, and so forth. So that is good news for in the 2D world, that we have an alternative now to CGM, or will have. So the first demo is around working with raster data. And to do that, I'm going to use VizEx Edit, or in this case, I'm going to use VizEx Edit Plus. So on the screen here, we could use TIFF, JPEG, or a raster, a PDF containing raster. We then could edit that, add value to it, and then export as a CGM or SVG. So let's just open up VizEx Edit. So to open a TIFF file, I basically just go to open. I can choose my file formats down here. So you can see we support many file formats, but in this case, I just want to bring in the TIFF file. So this is an old illustration that was done many years ago, but it still has to be maintained. So if I just zoom in, you can see that these are pixels. It's an image file. So not ideal, but to redraw it obviously would take some time. So what we've done in VizEx Edit is we haven't built in an image editor, but what we have done is double click, and you have the option to edit with your favorite image editor. In this case, I'm just going to use Paint. What I can also do is I can do some other things with the image. We've just built in this new resample thing to scale the image down, but also we can make the background transparent. So let me just edit with Paint to begin with. So what will happen is you can browse for your image editor, it might be Corel or whatever. You go edit with, and then it opens up the image here in Paint. So I'm just using Paint because it's just straightforward. So I can remove, say, an annotation, just delete it. I might want to replace it with something else, or I might want to remove a part entirely. So just delete that, then save it, close this down, and we should see that, oops, that was unexpected. We should see there that that part has gone. So I can edit in place my raster image within VizEx Edit. So let me just now go to make this background transparent. So the image itself is white and black pixels. So if I want to make those transparent, I can do, which might make it a lot easier to work with, or a bit easier to work with. So I did mention you could bring in a vector. So if we have like an image we want to use in here, this might come in a bit large, but if we bring in, say, the bearing, this is from our library. So I could bring in the bearing in this case, and I can work with that in here. So I can add a part to this illustration. So this would be the vector file, and here we have the raster. So side by side, you can match the line weights and so forth. Now if I save, I would save that as a CGM or an SVG file, and it would keep both sets of data intact, so I can go back and work with it again. So we think this is an important thing, that you can still work with old files effectively, if the quality is good enough, that is, from an image point of view. But you can still add to it with the vector tools. Some of the other things we built in, this is in the plus version, is that we had some customers where the text is also an image. So let me just zoom in on this particular area here. So we built in what we call an OCR, optical character recognition. So say I want to try and make this text instead of an image, I can drag over it and then click, and you can see, I can't actually, oh, I can move the way. Can you see how it's actually created this as text? So now we've got a text string that we can edit easily rather than an image file. So that's something we've built into the plus version. Okay, I'm going to open another image here. So this is a flat, so it's not a typical kind of technical illustration, it's a flat illustration. We can see it's got annotations, but again, it is a raster file. So when I click, I get an image file around the outside here. I can see that it's all the handles are just one big raster file. But we have what we call an auto hotspotter here. So this is in the plus version as well. So say again, I want to hotspot all these annotations. I can just click this button. You can see here that they're all highlighted apart from one. So and it is, excuse the pun, it is number one because it can't differentiate if it's an L or not on its own. But you can see that it's hotspotted all those callouts, and it's added it to the tree on the left. So that can be a powerful tool if you've got a lot of hotspotting to do on raster files. So it's already created those hotspots for us. And as I said, we can actually we can save this now. Let's save it as go to desktop, and for sake of argument, we'll save it as an SVG file. No, so we'll save it as a CGM. So I'm going to save it. Yeah, I'll just remember that name. Okay. And then if I go to my viewing environment, so this is our VizEx View HTML5 viewer, which is just a web-based viewer for CGM. I can upload that file from the desktop. Make sure, here we are. Did I save to the desktop? That's it. I must be missing it. Okay. Oh, there it is. And there it's, so you can see when I hover over now, these are the hotspots that are created. So that's just a short demonstration how you could work with raster, add metadata, edit the raster file, add vectors to it. Okay, let's go back to the main presentation. Sorry for the delay there. So moving on to creating 2D vector illustrations. So we can create them, but we can also revise them. And ones that have been created in other software, such as Adobe Illustrator, we could use various formats to come through, say a PDF and whatever. We can bring them through, and we can create illustrations from scratch within VizEx Edit and VizEx Edit Plus. So, and we have some drawing tools which I'll demonstrate to you. And we can also create 2D illustrations from 3D CAD data. So, and this would probably more be prevalent on new projects nowadays because a lot of the information is in the CAD system. So with that, we would take, say, a step or an IGES file, which we'll talk about briefly in a minute. and create a 2D illustration from it. And then add value again with call outs and so forth. So the most common one would be probably converting and repurposing 3D data. So you might say, why not use the CAD system to do that? Well, one is that it's probably not the domain of illustrators and technical illustrators and writers. And the CAD system's not primarily to do that task. So what we've done with VizEx Edit 3D, which is our 3D processing software, is that we've made it as easy as possible and give the specific tools needed by writers and illustrators to create illustrations. And also good data exchange options, a very easy way of manipulating that model with working with assemblies or exploding assemblies. And then from that, generate quality 2D graphics in the file formats we've just spoke about, say CGM or SVG. And also the ability to create 3D illustrations as well. So, and that's something that perhaps the CAD system are obviously engineering based, so that's their primary focus, and probably not looking at downstream delivering illustrations to instruct people or help people maintain or just look after equipment in an instructional way. So I mentioned earlier that the major CAD formats, open formats, are IGES and STEP. There are many 3D file formats though. And there are obviously native file formats as well. So some of the major CAD systems like Creo and CATIA and SolidWorks have their own internal file formats. We have taken a view on supporting those in the future, but at the moment, most people or most of our customers can get IGES or primarily STEP files from their CAD system. So from a demonstration point of view, firstly, I'll show you just working in 2D, and then which will be a brief demo, and then working in 3D with 3D data and converting it to 2D, and then looking downstream to CGM or SVG. So let's go back to VizEx Edit. Okay, so this is just a blank piece of paper really to work on. You can see the grid is in the background. This is an isometric grid that I've already set up. The grid is controlled by this control panel here, so I can just turn it off altogether. I can change the orientation of it, so we can have a flat or an isometric grid just by toggling on the panel here. I can align objects to the grid, so that means then when I draw something, it should actually snap to the grid isometric or vertical or horizontal. And I can also snap to the grid as well, so I can have increments that are active that I can draw to as well. Over here, I have a toolbar with all my drawing tools on. So let's just bring up simple a rectangle. And when I draw now, you should see actually snapping. It's very faint, so I apologize if you can't see it. But you can see, hopefully I'm drawing, and it gives me a distance, so forth, of the box that I've drawn, or the length of it. If I draw again up to the right, I can draw again the rectangle. It is very faint, I think, so, but you get the idea. So then I've just got this cube, which is isometric, and then go to my ellipse, and I can drag out, and it will, depending on which way I drag, it will drag the, hopefully in the right direction of the perspective for the isometric. So if I drag to the left here, it's going to put the ellipse on the top plane. So it should look correct. So that's just a simple cube. So anything I draw from a line, if I've got lines, will also draw out the line, and it will snap to the grid or snap to the different angles of the grid. So you do have that ability to draw from scratch, and I can obviously, because these are vectors, so now I'm working in a vector world, I can easily delete these or change them, make them bigger or smaller very easily. So obviously a better kind of way of working than in raster. So what I'm going to do here is just group these together. So let me just group these into one, and I'm just going to bring up the library. Let's just bring up. So we have a library of function within the software where you could actually save your parts. So if I've got the parts here, so you saw this area earlier with the bearing, that I could just drag and drop this on. So anything I potentially draw, like the cube here, which is obviously not a great piece of drawing, but I can add that to the library, give it a name. So as you begin to draw things, or you have things existing, you can just add them to the library and then drag them, drop them onto your workspace here. So this could be anything, really, anything that you've drawn or anything that's been existed in the that you have already. So say in this case S1000D, there's a series of symbols that we've drawn, so you can just drag and drop those on. So basically anything you can have in the library, and just keep it standard with your colleagues, and just work from scratch in the vector mode. Okay, so let's just switch over to VizEx Edit 3D. So this will gives the ability to work with those 3D CAD files. So I'm going to open or import, sorry, a step file. So you can see the formats I spoke about. So IGES and step. We have some others, but these would be the primary ones. So let's just say step file, and I have a step file here. I'm not sure what CAD system this was from. It's not a big file. It's only quite small, but it's just a good demonstration file to bring in quickly and work with. So this is the new version of, or will be the new version of VizEx Edit 3D. So we said we'd show it today. It's not quite ready to be released yet. So, but we've actually made this new tab here specifically for explosion. So what we can do now is say, I want a new explosion of this particular assembly. So if I drag out now, I can drag out that part. So I'm just going to reset it. The one thing that's not working quite right at the moment is the location line. But you could see there, we could actually put location lines on that as well. But they're not working quite as we want at the moment. So I could drag out. I can say I want the bolts to move those, and I want to move them all together. So I press my shift key down and I drag out. And then any other parts I want to remove, I'm just going to move this over this direction. And then we've had this new function where, say, this is coming up at a compound angle. I can now explode that from the center axis, using the center axis of it, and then just pull out. And the same can be true of this gear. Okay, so quickly I can get to that position. I then can save this. And then if I go to manage, any explosions I create for this particular assembly will be saved here. So I could have multiple explosions perhaps of this same model. I can edit it, or I could just view it again, and it will go back to how it was before. I can then export this and go to CGM, which will give me a 2D file with hidden lines removed. In fact, let me just change its name. Let me just go to the desktop, and save it. And I'm just going to keep the defaults. We have quite a few different things we can set here, but it should open the file directly in VizEx Edit. Okay, so there's our illustration. We can now add to this, so we might want to add call outs perhaps to this illustration. So you can see there, let me just reset. So call outs is at the top here. I want to make it to start at 1. So just put 1 in there, and now I should be able to go around. So you see how quickly it is to get from 3D to 2D, and the quality is good. They're all vectors, so it should make it easy to edit. And yeah, that is probably the most common way, I would say, today, that you can go to 3D to 2D. So hopefully you see the way that we did this within VizEx Edit 3D makes it very straightforward to actually manipulate the model and then create that quality 2D illustration from it. As I said, we're working on the centerline function. It just is a bit temperamental at the moment, but you should also be able to save these with center lines, location lines that you can then edit or take away once you're in the 2D world. Okay, so we might come back to this in a second. So let's just go back to the slides. So we just saw how we can take from work with 2D on its own, but also how we can process 3D data. So creating 3D illustrations, technical illustrations. When we started out, we kind of thought that there wouldn't be a massive call to create 3D illustrations. Mainly people would want to go to 2D, but perhaps the opposite has become true. And I think that's because the file formats are improving, the way of viewing on the web is improving. For 3D files, the files are smaller, computers are faster. So just to prove that we could use a 3D file even within PowerPoint, I'm just going to switch back to not the slide presentation mode, just out of the presentation mode a minute. So I'm going back to this slide, and I'm going to go to 3D models from this device, and I'm going to choose a format we'll talk about, GLTF GLB. Even gives you a preview of this before I insert it into PowerPoint. So now I've got a 3D illustration or 3D model within PowerPoint. And so you can see I can just go in the center and just reconfigure it. I'm happy with that with my slide. Let's go back to presentation mode. So this is why we think that 3D is going to become more used in the publications world, because the files are very easily accessible and you can use them a lot easier than perhaps was thought a few years ago. So creating 3D illustrations. VizEx Edit, we've just seen VizEx Edit 3D. It can import CAD data from Step and IGES. One thing that kind of happened in the background there is we saved as our own native format called VX 3D. The reason we do that is we can save what we do to that Step or IGES file and then go back and change it. So you can't really save to Step. We're not a CAD system. So we also want to make the file smaller. So that's why we created this native file format. So we only really use it for internal use. And the benefit is it optimizes the file size, and anything you do to the file is saved. And you've just seen VizEx Edit 3D that we can control the full control over the model. We can explode it, and we could also create spare parts illustrations, but not only 2D, but perhaps now we could make 3D parts illustrations. But the other step forward is that we can manipulate the model and record the movement, or animate it. So this could be a procedural or operation type illustration where things are moving through, say, a step procedure. And the way we would view that is through, so we need some kind of viewer. So we developed VizEx View 3D, which means that you could put this into an IETM. There are other views out there, by the way, for GLTF and GLB. So we selected GLTF and GLB as a primary format to distribute the 3D illustration, mainly because it was an open format. It's now an ISO standard. There's a binary version of it, which means everything is encapsulated in that one file, that was the file I just imported into PowerPoint. There's no plugin required for a browser. So if you want to view these illustrations in a web browser, you don't need a plugin to do that. They're very efficient models, so they're very light. They're not big file sizes, so you can really optimize them by compressing them further. And there's big support for GLTF and GLB from Microsoft and Adobe, etc. So we feel it's a format that's got some tremendous support from industry. So just going back to S1000D and the graphics working group, they just started work on 3D, and that is going to take place over the next few months and possibly year to define some guidelines around 3D. There are some in the spec already, but they're very kind of also high level, and there's no file format specified. So the working group will also look at a file format as well. I'm not saying it will be GLTF and GLB. There's various ones out there that are probably suitable. So just to give you if you're in that arena, S1000D, then 3D is definitely on the agenda. So the final demonstration, I'm going to go back to VX 3D. So you saw me working with the model before with the explosion tab, but we also have up here the animation tab. So I'm going to create a new animation. So as I said, this might be used in a procedural type illustration. It's where you have a series of steps to show the user or the maintainer how to disassemble this. So same model, but in the animation tab, we can see you have different controls. And at the bottom here, if you're familiar with any kind of video editing tools, you have like a timeline. So what I want to do here is click this first component, and you can see that I get a dialog box up here, and I want to drag this away. And it's now recorded what I've just done. So it's moving down the y-axis by this amount, and it's added it to the timeline. So I apply that. If I drag back, now I can replay that. So this is the 3D model. It's not 2D. It's 3D. So now I'm going to do the same thing again with the bolts. So I'm going to hold my Shift key down to select more than one. I'm going to move them away. You see again, it's added it down here and apply that. I'm going to reselect them. So let's reselect each one. And at this time, instead of moving, I'm going to fade them away. So what this means is it gives me more kind of screen space to explode something else, perhaps. So I'm going to apply that. So now we have, let's just play it back from here. it moves out and then they'll fade away. And now it perhaps gives me the option to move this component into this area. So the bolts will probably now be on a desk on the workbench somewhere. So now I've exploded the next one. You can see again it's added it at the bottom here, and I've applied that. And I'm going to do something different, reselecting this, and now I'm going to rotate this. So a rotation, it gives me the axis ellipses. I'm going to rotate around the Y, which is this one. Put 360 in and apply. So now if I drag back, you'll see it already. So you can see how quickly I'm doing this. So, and now it's going to rotate that. Hopefully you've seen that. And then I'll go back to this component here, this pin. And this time I'm going to select the axis that I'm going to move on. I'm going to make this the center axis as before and move this away and apply, and then do the same with the gear, because it's not on the isometric. So I just pull that away and apply that. I'm just going to go back to this, and there could be, we had some customers' feedback that they might want to highlight this in some way. So we built in this thing called highlight, and I can choose a color that I want to highlight it as. This will be part of the animation, and apply that. So now if I just pull back from here, perhaps I'll play the whole thing. Yeah, we're back at 0. I'm going to play using the one at the top here. So this now is the complete animation. So it should fade. This should come out and rotate. And then the pin comes out, and then hopefully that will flash. So there could be a caution that's applicable to that particular part of the procedure, which you then could highlight in some way. So hopefully you see how easy it is to create an animation within VizEx Edit 3D. I'm not going to pull that particular file up, but I am going to go to a couple of examples here. So firstly, if you have a exploded view, so this is a 3D file, and this could be just exploded because we have the GLTF or GLB has almost interactivity built into the component already. We don't have to add anything to it. We can have like a tooltip. It can see how it links to the table on this side. We'd have to create the link between the table and the graphic, but certainly there's no need to hotspot because the component itself is already got a metadata attached to it. So in some ways, it's even easier to create in here than it is within a 2D environment. And then I've got a different sheet here with a different exploded view. So you can see that it's definitely 3D because I can just move it around. And this is using the VizEx View 3D. And again, you can see how we have the interactivity between the two. And finally, I started to create their, say, a disassembly. So here we've linked that each step that we did with the text. So more kind of traditional, that you click step 1 and it brings that part away. Step 2 and it brings the bolts away. Step 3. So you get the idea that you could go through a procedure here. And it is, just to prove it, it is 3-dimensional. So you can see the speed that I'm at, hopefully on the webinar, but you can see the speed I'm working with that. Okay, let's go back to the slides. So that was the final demo. So just to summarize, the creation of 2D and 3D illustrations is pretty straightforward if you use the right software. So with the VizEx suite, we are really trying to give you the best tools possible to work with both 2D and 3D. With the Plus version of VizEx Edit, you get the OCR and the auto hotspotting, but you do get that ability to work with raster and vector within both of the pieces of software within VizEx Edit and VizEx Edit Plus. VizEx Edit 3D gives you that ability to work with the 3D CAD data, create 2D illustrations, save them as CGM and SVG, and then add value to them. And VizEx Edit 3D also gives you the ability to create 3D illustrations as well. So manipulate them, animate them, and then save out as a GLTF or GLB file. Okay, so yeah, those were the three products we used. You can email me or go to our website at cgmlarson.com and you can evaluate these. They're all available in there, so you just have to fill in the form or just email directly. We can send you all the details for the evaluation. And finally, we have some questions. If you want to pose any questions into the box, I know Don might be joining me in a second. Yeah, and we have the usual question about raster to vector conversion, which is almost inevitable. So we have a pretty stock answer. If your files are good, or raster files are good, then a reasonable quality, then don't turn them to vector. Use them as is and add to them. If they're poor quality, which would mean they're not really suitable for either to convert from raster to vector or to use as original illustrations, then you're probably better actually recreating them. So there are raster to vector software, like Illustrator has something built in, Corel, but invariably they'll create something that's almost impossible to edit. So if you need to, if you're just using them to see or as a picture, then great. But if you have to change them in any way, then the quality is not good enough. Don, have you anything to add to that?
No, I think that summarizes it. Yeah, essentially, it's better to work with it as is. And of course, we've got the OCR that kind of gives you some of the advantages, of vector. In other words, being able to hotspot the callouts. But yeah, unfortunately, it's that raster to vector technology is really not here yet. So
yeah, it's questionable if it ever will be here, to be honest, as well, because it is such a complex. Like with text, you might think that text is we can use OCR to create text from a raster image. I think that must be quite difficult. But in saying that, it uses like a comparison between letters to actually come up with the right answer. Whereas if you've got a part, you could have like 100 parts, say, on an illustration, and every one of them is different. So and then you have different piece of machinery. How does it know how to create that part correctly? It's just, you'd be better off retracing the illustration if the quality is that bad. I think we have a question here, Don, about PDF. Bringing in a PDF file. I don't know if you've got
yeah, yeah. The what you'd want to do. The question is, how can I import a PDF into VizEx Edit, crop it, and save it as CGM, and get the file size to be nice and small. But yeah, of course, it depends on the pixel format that you're coming from in the PDF. Now, PDFs can be vector or raster. If they're vector, they're going to be small. But if they're contained and embedded raster image, then what you want to do is make sure your settings to save it as, like if you go into the VizEx edit settings, there's things that control the pixel format. And you want to save the color or grayscale as JPEG. That'll get your best compression. So that's, you just want to make sure you're using the best compressions to get it nice and small. 50K for a raster image is pretty ambitious, though, to get it down to that size. It's probably, but you can try those things, and then of course you can try resampling in the raster editing thing. You know, if the image is oversampled, in other words, too many pixels, you can resample it and downsize, hopefully get some better, smaller sizes that way too.
Yeah, that question came from a customer, so please reach out to support@cgmlarson.com. If you've got an example file that you can send us, we can look at it and probably advise you on what might be the best process. Thank you, Don. Yeah, there's a question here about, or asking me to do the insert the 3D file again into. So perhaps I can quickly do that. Let me just. So yeah, it's here. So I'll just delete that. So I think under insert, and this is common within all Microsoft. I think you can even do it in Excel or Word. You can insert a 3D model. It has to be the right format though. So you can see here that they support various formats, including GLB. So you just have to have the right format that Microsoft supports, and then I just select it and insert it, and it will just come straight into the. So it's that easy. Like I say, it could be Word or any Microsoft. I think virtually any Microsoft product supports the insertion of 3D. Hopefully you followed that. Okay. Whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen. Okay, there's another question here. Oh, this is an interesting one, Don. I think we've been asked this before. Can we add audio to a animation? And it would have to be post, because GLTF and GLB do not support audio. They're a 3D file format. So you would probably have to do it somewhere within your web browser, so that something audio triggers with the step itself. So I don't think it's not something we could add within our software. The only way you could do it is we can also save as an MP3 or MP4 file the animation. We didn't actually show that, but you can export as a video. So it wouldn't be 3D, but it'd be an MP3 or MP4 file, which then you could take into some video editing software. So that's a WMV, but you can see MP4, AVI, and then you could take it into, say, well, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but video creation software. We use Camtasia or whatever, and there you could add video, audio, but it wouldn't be 3D anymore. It'd be 2D. Otherwise, you would probably have to add it post somehow within the HTML. Don, if you
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. The only other possibility is actually doing a text to speech, which is built into Chrome, and that's where you can actually take a text file and have it enunciated with the speech to, text to speech features in HTML5. So, but that would be outside the scope of our software. But I think their technology is coming to be able to do that.
Yeah, it wouldn't be something that would be in the 3D file though. So
Yes, correct.
Yeah, you'd have to do some post work to actually do that. But it's a good question. Probably the final question is what metadata is attached to the call out hotspot that defines it. So if it doesn't say 2D or 3D, but if I go to 3D here, sorry, 2D, and I go to oh, sorry, a bit better if I go over here and modify. So the hotspot in 2D, it will get an ID and it will get a name. And usually the name of this file, or the name of that hotspot, will be the thing that links in the to the, say, the XML. So there's some kind of link, there's a link between the XML and that name file and that file as a whole. So you have the hierarchy is the file name and then the name of within that file, and then the link could be forged between the two for like an interactive kind of spare parts type illustration. So the metadata is really the hotspot and also the link, that when you hit that hotspot, what happens? Or do you give it, so it could be within the CGM or SVG itself, it could take you to another SVG or a different view within the, so you could zoom in and within the graphic, or it could be a link to the text, say to a spare parts list. Now, CGM and really SVG are the only file formats, certainly in the web browsers, that would you be able to do that. PDF, really, it would be within a PDF file within that whole environment. It doesn't really give you that external ability to link. So you really have to use CGM or SVG. So, yeah, I think that's all the questions we have. Yeah, thank you, Don, for your help there. And thank you, everybody, for attending. We'll hopefully have another webinar sometime this summer. We haven't got a topic yet. But if you have any questions post-webinar that you want to actually ask us, please do use our email. And we have recorded the session, so you should get a link tomorrow with a link if you want to give that to your colleagues. That'd be great. And so thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.